right, today we're getting real. And let's start. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you were there physically with somebody you love, right? But emotionally, totally checked out. They're talking and you're kind of nodding along, sort of like kind of listening, like going through the motions, but your mind thinking about tomorrow's email or replaying something your boss said or the to-do list or whatever. You don't even realize you're doing it until your partner says, "Are you even listening to me?" And you realize in that moment, no, I'm not. And you feel this wave of shame because you are really not emotionally available. And perhaps a moment of recognition about how all this other stuff in your life is impacting you mentally, emotionally, impacting your relationship, impacting the way you feel, and on the bright side, that it is time to make a change. And that's what you're going to learn how to do in today's episode of Love, Happiness, and Success. I have a very special guest planned for you today who's going to take us deep into the science, the neuroscience of burnout, explaining what's really going on underneath the hood when you feel exhausted and specific actionable things that you can do like today to start turning this around. By the end of today's episode, you're going to have new insight, clarity, and a plan to start taking your life back from the grind. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm so glad you're here. I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. I am a psychologist, a marriage and family therapist, a board certified coach, and your host. And every week here on the show, we're talking about different things that support your growth, your relationships, your well-being, and also your ability to succeed in life, whatever that means to you. And listen, if you are a high achieving, super responsible, conscientious person who's always trying to do the right thing, man, it's easy to fall into this. If you're feeling more irritable, less patient, like your brain isn't working as well, and like you're kind of checked out from your relationships, this episode is for you. You're going to get so much out of this. So today I'm talking with Dr. Guy Winch. He's a clinical psychologist who has spent his career translating the science of emotional health into practical tools that people like me and you can actually use, especially when stress starts hijacking your life. Now, Dr. Guy is a very interesting, experienced therapist, and he is also the co-host of a podcast called Dear Therapists. Fascinating stuff where he and his co-host, Lori Gottlieb, are speaking with real people about their issues and providing advice. So check that out. And his new book is called Mind Over Grind, How to Break Free When Work Hijacks Your Life, which is all about how work stress can spill into our personal well-being, impacting everything, and how we can push back and reclaim our lives, frankly. So, Dr. Guy Winch, it's such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. And that was a great summary of what the book's about. That's very good.
Well, I'm so glad. And, I'm so excited to talk with you about this because as I was preparing for this show today, personally, I was like, oh my gosh, has this guy been spying on me? Because I have been in that place so many times. Yeah. And it sounds like you have too. There's an origin story here.
I opened the book with the origin story, which unfortunately was that for me, I got burnt out after 1 year in my professional life. 1 year into opening a private practice as a psychologist, I got completely burnt out and I wasn't aware of it. One of the things I always say to people, like, you can study, get a PhD in psychology like I did, not a word about burnout. We're not taught anything about it. I realized it, as many people do, when a crash comes. And in my case, the crash was it was a Friday night. I got into the elevator after a very long week with a neighbor and the elevator stalled. And the neighbor went into a panic. He started hitting all the buttons. And so now I'm going to have to stop on every floor and saying, "This is my nightmare. This is my nightmare." And I, who am a compassionate person, I promise, was so aggravated by that he's hitting all the buttons. I looked at him and said, "And this is my nightmare."
You, sir, are my nightmare.
Yes, and it was so cruel and so unkind and so out of character for me that when I got home, after stopping on every floor, when I got home, I was like, what's going on? And then I realized I feel like I've been doing this for 50 years. It was one. And I realized I was totally burnt out. I didn't like what I was doing. I didn't love what I was doing. I didn't believe in what I was doing. And I realized, wow, that's really bad. And that's when I got interested in burnout and in work stresses and why we can get burnt out and why we get these stresses. And I've been interested since, and it's been many years since then.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story and talking about your own experience and realization. And can we also just acknowledge, well, actually, let me turn this into a question for you. Being a therapist can be a uniquely challenging profession. And many times early career therapists flame out to the point where they don't even get through their postdoc. They're like, I'm done. I'm going into HR. See y'all later. Right? We lose a lot of Padawan. But do you think that you were having experiences that were made you uniquely vulnerable to burnout? Or were you experiencing things that a lot of people encounter that impact? Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't about doing the therapy. It wasn't the issue. To me, the issue was the one thing that we all encounter. Anyone who's self-employed or trying to be successful, who's driven, who's motivated, encounters the same thing, which is that it wasn't about the number of hours I spent in my office doing therapy. It was about the hours I spent at home after work ruminating about everything, worrying about everything, thinking about it nonstop. I was working all these hours during the day, and then in my head, I was working when I get home. But I always say to people, your work day doesn't end when you leave the office or when you close your laptop. It ends only when you stop thinking about work. And many of us, especially we're in challenging jobs, demanding ones, even ones we love, don't stop thinking about work. And so you are, in essence, switched on, activated in fight or flight all the time at work and then at home. That's where the exhaustion happens.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly right. And it's all consuming. You know, I've had that experience so many times, like getting off of work after a long day. And of course, also, I think being an entrepreneur, like it never ends. And it's like all of the things, right? And I think also even being a therapist, I mean, there have been so many times that I found myself thinking about clients after the fact. And, I've had my husband or my kid be like, Mom, you're not, I have a little 7-year-old sometimes and she's trying so hard to get my attention. And I'm like, oh yeah, right. But really, I'm so distracted. And you're saying that kind of fragmentation cognitively is part of the energetic burden that leads to burnout.
And it's not just the energetic one, it's the physiological one. Because look, our workplaces, many of them, even if they're not harsh and toxic, which unfortunately many are, they're still very demanding. They're still very pressured. It's the modern day battlefield. And our mind doesn't distinguish between a literal battlefield and the one in which you might have to defend yourself from co-workers who are trying to stab you in the back and bosses who don't appreciate you and other clients who are rude and incivil or the bullying or the harassment or anything. Our mind doesn't distinguish. We are in that combative battle mode a lot of the day. And what we ruminate about when we get home, to ruminate means to obsess over, to stew over. What we ruminate about when we get home is often the small stuff. It's that one person who was just so rude to us in the hallway that we can't stop there. Why was she so rude? And why did she say that? And I should really say something. I wish I said this. And then we had these fantasy arguments that we're never going to have, but we imagine ourselves, I will say this, and then I'll say that, and then I'll do this, and there mic drop moments, but we can spend hours on something we're never going to do. And yet keeps us in fight or flight. It keeps us in battle mode. And certainly our family around us is looking at us like, are you here at all? What's happening? And so that's part of the problem. We are not aware when we are processing something adaptively and when we are just spinning. And there's a lot of spinning. And the more stressful the day, the more challenging, the more spinning happens after hours.
Yeah. Well, and And Dr. Guy, maybe we could talk a little bit more about this, that like rumination loop, because you're saying that, I'm imagining that part of where we're going is that to start to get out of this, like getting your mind back under control is part of it. But you're bringing up such a good point, which is that our ability to envision things and picture ourselves in different scenarios triggers the same kind of emotional response in us than actually having the experience. And that when we're not even aware that we're kind of going into different places cognitively, the impact that it's having on our bodies and on our stress levels, even when we're out of that situation, is really enormous. And so, like, step one, maybe just to be aware that that's happening. Is that where you advise people to start?
It has to start with awareness, because we have to catch ourselves doing something that's unproductive. Now, it feels productive when something's upsetting you. It feels productive to think about it, but you're usually not thinking about it in a productive way, right? I mean, that insult that happened in the hallway that you're then spending 3 hours fantasizing about the argument that you'll never have, that insult hurt your feelings, was upsetting and distressing, and now you are voluntarily reactivating that wound over and over and over again while you're at home. You're reliving the greatest crappy moments from the workday over and over again, and you're not actually resolving anything. This is not thinking in order to get a resolution, figure something out, have action, items that you can take away from it, any learning that you can take, nothing. It's just spinning. It's like being in an emotional hamster wheel. It's just damaging. It floods your body with cortisol. The research tells us that the more you ruminate like that, the more work hijacks your mind after the hours. The more you ruminate like that, the more trouble you're going to have sleeping. So you're going to have poor rest. The less present you'll be with your family. You're going to have a worse mood, which is going to make you eat unhealthy foods, because that's how we comfort. If you keep doing it over time, it predisposes you to a high risk of cardiovascular disease. It's bad in every possible way, but very few people stop themselves and are able to say and identify that and say, I'm ruminating. I need to stop that right now. And here are the tools I can use in order to do that.
Okay. Well, let's definitely go there. But first, I don't know if this is a fair question or not, but I mean, you're such an expert in this space. You've done so much research. So if anybody knows the answer to this, you do. But why do we do this? What is that like mental grip that's so hard to get unwound from? And I think we can all relate, like lay down to go to bed at night. And that's when the mental movies start, right? Or after the day's over. What is that about?
We are compelled to make sense of difficult experiences. It's good if we actually make sense of difficult experiences. Figure something out about them, organize them in a certain way. If we work them in a way that's adaptive and healthy, terrific, because the goal then is we can put them aside. It doesn't remain an open wound. We can let the wound scab over. And that's useful if we do it correctly. Unfortunately, as you know, no one teaches us how to do that correctly, and no one teaches us how to identify when we're doing it very much incorrectly, when we're actually picking at those scabs repeatedly rather than allowing them to heal or figuring something out to make them less upsetting. So the tendency is a very natural human tendency to want to explore these upsetting things to make sense of them. We don't use the right tools a lot of the time in order to do so. And in the book, I try and give people the right tool. Here's how you actually do that correctly and in a healthy way, with the goal that you can then get home, spend 15 minutes figuring something out, and then put it aside and be present in what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that when we get stuck in that rumination, it's really our brains trying to close loops. We're trying to solve problems or figure something out or process something, but we're doing it in this inefficient way. And that if you learn how to help your brain close the loops, then it will release you. And all of a sudden, your burnout levels, your ambient stress levels start going down. Well, this is fascinating. And Dr. Guy, would you share even one of your strategies in your book on the other side of the break? Amazing. Okay, 3, 2, 1. And now we're going to pretend like we're back. I always like to find a little cliffhanger moment to do that. So, Dr. Guy, we are all on the edges of our chairs. Prior to the break, we were talking about how one of the keys of resolving burnout is something that nobody would really have thought of until listening to you and reading your book, which is how do we stop ruminating? And you're about to share a strategy to help your brain close some loops and release you from that cognitive purgatory.
Right. As you pointed out earlier, the initial most important step is awareness. You have to be aware that you're ruminating. And you are aware that you're ruminating because if you come home and your mind is churning and you feel all the angst in your chest, in your stomach, wherever you tend to feel stress, remember you're activating all the upsetting feelings you had when the incident happened. So when you feel that, catch yourself and go, I'm probably ruminating. And whether you think you are or not, here's one thing that you can do. Again, to allow your brain, to give your brain some closure about the matter, you need to figure it out. You need to turn it into a problem that needs to be solved. So, for example, so that person said something rude to me in the hallway. Do I need to address it with them? Do I need to have a talk with them? What are the conclusions I can reach from that? Okay, they're not my friend, or maybe they were just having a very bad day. Figure out what happened and what, if anything, you need to do about it, right? Your boss cut you off in a meeting, you didn't get the promotion, the client was very obnoxious. Do I need to talk to them people? Do I need to organize myself differently? Why doesn't my boss fully appreciate me? What can I do to figure that out? Pose it as a problem and start finding answers to that specific problem. Here's what I can do: A, B, and C. Now, you don't have to figure out everything because you might spend all evening doing that, but you can figure out, I need to figure out what my boss appreciates about my coworker because I seem to appreciate them very much. So what is it about them that they appreciate? What is it about me that I do that might be rubbing them the wrong way? How do I catch that and correct it? What do I say the next time this obnoxious coworker passes me in the hall or says something rude to me? I should have a ready-made response, or do I need to have a conversation with them? If so, what's the goal of that conversation? And then work backwards. What's the best way to achieve the goal that I identified? You can even say, these are things I need to figure out, and I am putting in my calendar for the next day an hour to sit and figure that out. Even if you don't do all the figuring out, but having a plan, knowing what you need to figure out, scheduling a time to do it with the full intent of doing it, will allow your brain to kind of like, okay, this is not an open wound now. This is not an open-ended thing. We have closure on it. We know what we're going to do. We know the approach. We know the strategy. We've done some of it now. We'll do the rest later. I can let this go.
Yeah. Okay. So to turn it into a problem that you can solve and then begin looking for solutions is a way to kind of shift your brain into a different kind of thinking. Now, just strategically, I know that when I just have these thoughts kind of looping around in my head, they just sort of like stay there. For me, I'm able to kind of shift into that problem solving type thinking when I start journaling. I'm a big writer. So I like haul out a notebook and like, you know, here's what's going on. Here's how I feel about it, like processing. And I think probably some people that's part of what they might use therapy for is like a cognitive processing, articulating the situation. And are those strategies that you would recommend, or do you think that there are ways to also do this internally, or does it kind of depend on what works for an individual person? Like, what do you do?
I used to like journaling about it if I was really stuck, and the way I would journal is I would start asking questions. Again, I would pose the problems like, why am I so upset about this? Why does this person really get under my skin? What about them really does that? What's my vulnerability here? I would, if I was really stuck. But actually, when I say pose it as a problem that needs to be solved, that is not the most simple thing. Like, for example, one of the things people ruminate about so much, but again, completely pointlessly, is I just have so much to do. I just have so much to do. When am I going to get everything done? When am I going to get all of this done? So how do you turn that into a problem solving? Well, that is a scheduling question. The question is, what are the items I'm most worried about? Where do I have room for them in my schedule? What can I move to make room for them in my schedule if I don't have room? Let me look over my schedule and see how to place them so I feel more comforted that I will be able to get them. What do I need to get off my plate? Who can I delegate to? All of those are answerable. The minute you start thinking in that practical way, then that is what helps you. But again, it depends on how you have to frame it as a problem to be solved. Like, even again, if it's interpersonal, do I need to address this with that person? Why are they doing this? What's going on? Do I need to address it with them? And you always start with the outcome you want. What's the outcome I want by doing so? Now work backwards, because otherwise you're just going to go inventing as opposed to trying to achieve a certain outcome. But again, this is all problem solving and strategy. If for some people, you can come home and say to your partner, if they're willing, hey, something really aggravating happened today at work. Is it okay if we take 10, 15 minutes? I want to figure out what to do about it, problem solve it. I need you to give me some perspective if I'm missing it, if I'm lacking it. And then I'll try, once we have an idea and a plan, I'll be able to put it aside and be present in whatever's happening. Can you help me out there?
Hmm. Okay, Dr. Guy Winch, the title of your book is now starting to make sense to me. You called it Mind Over Grind. And I'm getting it. You're saying that a lot of the stress, the burnout that we're experiencing is because of what's happening in our mind, and to start to develop different strategies based on what works for you. Maybe you're a journaler, maybe you're a list and schedule type person, maybe you're an external processor, want to talk to your partner. These are fantastic strategies, though, just to like get your mind out of a loop and into a more productive place. Wow. All right. Well, and this is important too. And I'm sure you go into so many more dimensions of this in the book, Mind Over Grind, How to Break Free When Work Hijacks Your Life. Can we pivot though for a second into the why this is so important? I mean, one of the things that I remember reading as I was preparing today is that I believe this quote was attributed to you, that, people don't fall out of love. They fall out of bandwidth. Like, relationships suffer when we feel so cognitively, energetically, and overloaded that it's like we don't have the capacity for connection anymore. Was that you?
Yes, I mean, I talk about that in the book. That part of what happens. I mean, we do have a limited amount of bandwidth. Let's just establish that as a basic fact. We do not have an unending reservoir of mental and emotional energies to expend. It's limited. It's a limited resource, and so when we spend a ton of it one place, we have less left over to spend in other places. But beyond that, when you are really stressed out by work, when you are coming home and you're preoccupied, you mentioned people who are doing startups, who are entrepreneurs, who are self-employed, who are mom and pop businesses, who are, striving. And this can happen to people in graduate school, in undergraduate, if they're that kind of single-minded. Then you are so focused on what's going on, that becomes the most important thing to you. By definition, other things feel less important. And emotional drifting can start in relationships because you're actually not getting home and connecting. You're not getting home and sharing your feelings about life, or about, you're just preoccupied with, it's all about work all the time. And again, for a lot of people, existentially, they're under threat at work. Like, there's good cause for it, but they don't realize that the balance has shifted so poorly in terms of work, and life is getting so small that they're actually, feeling more distant. One of the things that happens when you come home from work and you're still in the fog of war, and
The
your
fog
partner,
of war. Yeah.
well, because that's,
That's
again,
a good way of
battlefield,
explaining
right?
it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your partner comes up to give you a hug and tell you about their day. It can feel like an intrusion because you haven't shifted your mindset yet. You're still in the battlefield. So they're coming home and telling you about this kid did this, or I did this, or my mother said that, and you're like, I'm dealing with my life here. I'm dealing with my whole career here. I can't. I'm not ready for that. And even if you don't express it, you can stiffen. It can feel like an intrusion, which they pick up. Just one other thing, because I don't. That there's research that shows that if you are stressed out at work, your partner A, can develop symptoms of burnout because that's how much you transfer them. B, can lose their sex drive. Your partner will lose their sex drive. And again, to me, that's obvious. Why? Because if you're with someone who's so stressed out, you could roast a marshmallow on them. It's not attractive.
It's not hot, though.
No.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Okay. There's a lot to unpack here. Can we just rewinding a tiny bit? You mentioned did you call it relationship drift? Is that what you called it?
Emotional drift.
Emotional drift. What is that?
Look, this happens because of stress or because of all kinds of things. Feeling connected in our relationships is an active process. We can only glide for so long. We have to keep reinvesting in our relationships. That's why, when I say to people like, when is your date night? And they're like, we don't need a date night. And I'm like, oh, kind of you do. In other words, unless you tend to be very, very affectionate and you're sitting on the couch and there's intimacy there and all, but you have to, this is what the work on relationships is. Like there are a lot of distractions that go on. You have to keep the connection, the emotional connection going. That happens in conversation. That happens in doing considerate acts and being kind and responding to bids when one person says, oh, I saw this interesting article, not to go like, I don't have time for that now, but to be like, tell me about this thing that interests you. In other words, those are ways to feel connected. When we feel stressed out and overburdened, we tend to stop doing that. And then emotional drift can happen. It happens slowly, but we feel less close. We feel less connected. We feel less intimate. And then everything is more vulnerable in terms of how that relationship goes. What we get out of it is less. What we put into it is less. And a process can start where two people become really transactional. It's like, did you get the milk? Did you pick up the kid? Did you pay the electric? But there's no real conversation happening anymore.
Yeah. Okay. The image that's coming into my mind when the connection, it's almost like two people each holding on to an end of the rope in the water and this emotional drift. And what happens when you stop putting energy into that? It's like one person just sort of starts going downstream. And that's what happens when there's this almost hyper focus and hyper fixation on all these other things that might in the moment seem more important, that they eclipse your ability to be present. And I think, what's interesting, I'm a psychologist like you, and I'm also an MFT. I do a lot of couples counseling. And when you ask people, what is most important to you? What are your values? They will always say it's their family, it's their relationship. But then when you look at the way that they're living, and I am certainly guilty of this as well, what we do is not in alignment with what we say is most important to us. And I really appreciate what you're sharing is that you really stop being almost emotionally available if so much of your attention is fixated on like work.
Right. And it's also going to cause, and these are dynamics, as you said. I'm also trained as a couples and family therapist. These are dynamics.
We have so much in common.
We do indeed. These are dynamics. And there's even a story in the book I tell about something that happened during my training as a couples and family therapist. I'm just going to mention it, as you don't have to go into it because you're going to be fascinated. But I don't know if other people as a therapist will. But it's when I was training with a very big name in the field. This is many years ago, and you train with a one-way mirror where people look. And he was doing a session as a demonstration, and he got so frustrated, he hit a client.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. That was like a laugh of shock and horror.
It is a laugh of shock and horror. It was an amazing thing.
He actually hit a client.
It was
not
a kid.
Not
and the
through
kid,
the therapy pillow.
It's not. It was a kid. It was a teenager. The teenager was truly the most annoying child in the world. But whack is what happened. Anyway, my point... this is a complete, this is a tangent. I want to try and get back.
But a very interesting one. Okay.
The whole story's in the book, and it comes in a chapter in which I talk about one of the other things that gets hijacked is our ethics, and because, and our morals. But anyway, that aside. Where were we? No, I
a
distracted
teenager got
myself
assaulted
now.
behind a one-way mirror in a therapy
before
training session. No, but why did you tell me why you went into that story? Because we were talking about how the fixation takes us away. What about that story meant something to you?
No, it was about when, you're saying, yes, I'm trained also as a couples and family therapist, and I even talk about that in the book, and that was my association to the story that I tell about that kind. I do talk about different moments in my training in the book, because there were moments of very, very high stress, in certain moments. But what happens between couples is a dynamic. In other words, it's not just that somebody might come home feeling stressed and checked out. It's how does their spouse respond to that? Well, their spouse responds to that by the kids too, by the way. I'm going to avoid them. They're all their irritation. I can sense the tension. They're like, I don't want to be around that because it's unpleasant to be around that. So they start to avoid. And then they avoid, and then the other person is like, well, they're avoiding. Again, not even consciously necessarily. Well, they're avoiding, so I can just, how many couples do you know, have you worked with, that get home, and even if they're in the same room, they're on different devices. So there's one's on the iPad, one's watching TV, one's in the study, one's in the den. They are not connecting. They're present together, but they're each avoiding each other because of these things. So a dynamic happens which can develop, and that's where the emotional drifting can be, like from both people. And that's why it always takes two, to reconnect. And sometimes I'll say to someone, look, you need to start reconnecting. Here's a suggestion. When you get home tonight, instead of just getting on your laptop, scooch over, take their hand and say, do you remember when we used to watch things and hold hands? Let's do that. Now, they're going to be so startled by that.
Why are you
because it's been so long. Yeah. They're going to look at you and go, what did you do? And you're like, and then you're going to have to explain, no, I didn't do anything. I'm just missing us, kind of thing. Like,
They'll be very suspicious. Okay.
Yes.
Well, okay. So let's just go a little bit deeper into this. I mean, so, people listening to this, perhaps like me, and not that I'm going to turn this into my own therapy session, but at the same time, this is a pretty amazing opportunity. So it might as well. But so for me, I have a stressful job, I'm running a business. I have lots of things. And I think I'm also, I do have ADHD, and I think that impacts me. But so I can relate to what you're describing. Coming home from a long day, and I've been doing stuff for 12 hours, and I am so overstimulated. I feel like my brain is a pinball machine, and my kids are stuff, and there's cats, and there's, things are beeping, and I just want to make it all go away. I just need quiet. And I think that I do that. I avoid, I check out, I'm or turn on the TV, stop talking. Is something that I'll do sometimes. And I know it's not good. And I have so little time with my family, and I feel guilty about it afterwards. I'd really like to be more present. But what would you advise somebody like me who is overstimulated at the end of the day? Is that part of what you see in your practice? Is the experience I'm describing? Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I address this also, in the book, because it's very, very common experience for people. Again, they come home super charged up. And the home might be chaotic with kids running around and animals and all of that, but it's a very different kind of chaos. It's not a threat of a chaos. It's just noise. And so what I suggest in the book is this. You need to train your brain to shift mindsets, to transition from the end of the workday to the start of your personal time. The work-life balance, this is the life part. People say, well, I added an hour of yoga. And I'm like, the life part is great. All for yoga, but the life part is not that. The life part is being present in the life part, with the kids running around, with the making of the dinner and the dishes and the bedtimes and the homeworks and all of this stuff. That's where the life is. You need to be able to enjoy that when you can. So what I recommend to people is you need time to transition your mindset from one mode to another. And the best way to do it is, first of all, if you need to say to people, when I come home, I'm going to be in my bedroom for 10 minutes. You don't have privacy in the bedroom, the toilet, doesn't matter where, somewhere you can close the door. No,
they
for some people,
me.
Let's be practical. Yeah. No, that you put locks on the door, mommy's in the toilet, anyway. So, but you need the 10 minutes. And here's why. You need to develop a ritual that will train your brain to condition your brain in the most Pavlovian way to like come down into a different mindset, into a different kind of elevated activation. The way you do that is by employing as many of your senses as possible. You start with music. Music is very evocative. So what's a playlist? What's a song or two or three that will put you in the mindset of home life now? So you can come out of whatever that, the demands of the workday were and be in your home life. Whatever calms you, whatever prepares you, whatever puts you in mommy mode or wife mode or whatever the thing is, listen to that. Listen to the same playlist, because again, you're trying to make your brain condition to this. The other thing you need to do is you need to change clothes. Clothes are very embodied. They make us feel a certain way. That's why power suits are called power suits and leisure wear is called leisure wear. They make us feel powerful or relaxed. And so change your clothes into clothes you associate with being at home in a more relaxed way, in a less stressful way. People say, well, I work in jeans and a t-shirt and I work from home. I'm like, terrific. Have jeans and t-shirts you wear when you're working. Have different jeans and t-shirts you wear when you're not. Your mind will learn to tell the difference if it's different sets. So change clothes. That's really helpful. Shift the lighting if you're working from home, so that it seems like a different environment. Put a plant on the laptop, like remove the phone reminders. Aromatherapy is useful. Light a candle, open a window if you live outside with nature. I live in New York City. Different things waft in when you open a window, so it's not necessarily the most practical, but like, do employ all your senses. And if you do this regularly, those same steps on a regular basis, your brain will learn, like, oh, now we're going into a different mode. Now it's about family mode. Like, if for some people, cooking is great because you're working with your hands. The smells and all of that is a very different mindset. For some people, a shower is terrific because showers are a really way to wash away a mindset as well as anything else. But develop your ritual, trial and error, that works for you, that trains your brain, that when you start doing these steps, it knows what's coming. Our brains are prediction machines. It knows what's coming, and what's coming is a different mode.
This is fantastic advice. I am going to try this. I do work from home. My commute is like 6 steps into the house and there's no transition. And as you're talking, I'm like, I think this is exactly what I need, some kind of ritual. And I think all our friends here listening with us right now, Dr. Guy, are like nodding their heads and maybe even thinking about what this might look like in their lives to create a ritual where they are creating a separation, where they're kind of calming down and intentionally shifting gears so that they can be more present in their
Some people will
personal
take a
lives.
walk around the block and do this so that they come home when they're working from home. During the pandemic, I worked with somebody who would finish work, get into the car, drive around the block, because that's what he was used to. He was used to when he comes in and he parks, he can shift. But without parking, his brain didn't do it. So you had to get in the car to do. Anyway, whatever works for you. It's trial and error, but keep experimenting until you find the thing.
Oh my gosh. You guys, we are talking to Dr. Guy Winch about some of the ideas that he shared in his book, Mind Over Grind: How to Break Free When Work Hijacks Your Life. And on the other side of this break, I am going to ask Dr. Guy the $1 million question that you don't want to miss. Okay, we're coming back from our pretend break. Now, what's the $1 million question that we don't want to miss? The thing that, as you were researching this, putting all this advice and information and perspective and wisdom together, we're like, this is what people really need to understand.
For me, what people really need to understand is that when you are stressed out, when you are busy, you are putting your head down and going from task to task to task just to get through, and you are on autopilot. And bad things happen on autopilot because we need to be much more intentional and deliberate to manage this modern workplace and the obligations we have. On autopilot, we don't think about our day and curate breaks that are going to be recharging for us, or that are going to give us relief. We don't think about, when do I have 15 minutes to have a lunch that I can sit outside and enjoy. Or I have a very difficult morning. Who can I call afterwards for 5 minutes to kind of just vent after that difficult morning? Because that would be useful. Even when we get home, we tend to over-index. Some people, like, you're a parent, you're probably busy. Some people are just like, I'm wiped out. I need to spend 4 hours vegging on the couch and doing screens, whatever the screen is. It's not going to help you feel better the next morning, because all you're doing is resting, and that won't deplete your batteries, but it won't recharge them. To recharge them, you actually have to do something active that makes you feel rejuvenated. Except your mind is not distinguishing well between physical fatigue and mental fatigue. You are mentally tired. You're not physically tired. You sat all day, most people. So your mind is telling you, no, you're wiped out. You couldn't possibly. Yes, you can possibly. And everyone knows that when they force themselves to get up, and if they're active, to work out, or if they're a maker, to go and make something, or if they're creative, to go and play the instrument, write for a bit, paint, work in the garage, whatever the thing is, when they force themselves to do it, even if it's for 15 minutes, for 30 minutes, they come back with a second wave because you recharged. So again, if you're on autopilot, you won't recharge. You won't take smart breaks during the day. You won't curate your day so you don't have too much overload in whatever degrees of freedom that you can, and whatever things you can move around. Autopilot, being not mindful, is not going to work. We actually have to be much more thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional about how we manage ourselves in this current workplace. That's the big thing.
That's huge. But because it's like, it's almost counterintuitive in some ways, but it's so true. An autopilot is that you do what feels like the right thing to do. You feel tired, even though, to your point, physically you're not. Maybe you're cognitively tired, but that the real antidote is to actually invest and cultivate energy by doing something active that might feel a little bit hard at first, because it will require energy. You do have to get up and go do something as opposed to lay there passively.
It'll feel really difficult.
Yeah.
Sure, to get off the couch.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's the path to
right.
restore your energy.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, because I think a lot of people consider burnout like, oh, I need to rest. I can't do something else. But that isn't true.
It's not just that isn't true. It's like the burnout is because all you're doing is work. Where are the things that interest you? Where are the things that make you feel like you? Where's the oxygen for those aspects of your personality and identity that don't get expression at work? Where does that come in? You have to find room for that. That's the life part. And the life part is not just about life externally, it's about being able to show parts that the people that they lost touch with those friends that they had, that they could be goofy with, or silly with, or outrageous with. And that's a part of them, but they never get to express it, or funny with, but they never get to express it. But it's so important. And it doesn't take, you don't have to join a philharmonic if you're a violinist. 15 minutes, half an hour of practicing. If you're a maker, then spend 30 minutes on something. Spend 20 minutes writing a passage if you can't do the whole thing. It doesn't take much to reinvigorate, but we have to know to do it, because just to say the psychological dynamic, autopilot means we're deferring our coping mechanisms to our unconscious mind, to our subconscious mind. Our unconscious mind is primitive. It doesn't plan, it doesn't strategize, it just gives emotional relief. So what you're going to do when you have 5 minutes at work is you're going to go to social media. What you're going to do when you get home is just going to plop down on the couch and veg, because that's your unconscious mind doing, like, you feel relief. Here's relief, but it's not thinking about, what kind of relief actually do I need, and actually need to recharge, and actually need to feel refreshed, and I need to move my body because I've been sitting. Those come from intentional thoughts and strategizing about what you need. So the other part about the autopilot is you're completely deferring your coping mechanisms, and that's the other thing that gets hijacked. One of the other things that gets hijacked is our coping mechanisms. We just defer to our autopilot, to our unconscious mind, and it makes all the wrong choices.
Yeah, absolutely. It reaches for the comfy or comforting, or
yes.
What might feel
easy,
relaxing, easy in the moment. And the truth is that you need to restore your energy and your vitality in order to be well. But and this is why your book is so valuable is that I think to do that people need to understand that they need to do things that don't feel true in the moment,
Right.
but that comes through that manual override. So good. Okay. So listen, before we wind things up, I would love to hear a story of maybe redemption, but I'd love to hear, I mean, you've done this work with so many people for such a long time. Who comes to mind? A person who was so work focused, they were so burnt out, they were so depleted, maybe for a long time, and they were doing all the things. They were on autopilot. What happened to them? What happened to their relationships? What was the low point? So to serve as a cautionary tale for like what can happen when you don't do the things we're talking about today.
Well, one of the examples I give in the book, I only follow 5 people throughout the entire book. So you just get to hear their journey throughout the entire book as opposed to just different people here and there. One of them is a 25-year-old. Her fake name is Priya, because all fake names. And she came to me because she had just quit her 11th job in like 5 or 6 years or something like that. And she did that each time because that was her unconscious mind. Every time things got stressful, she was like, I can't do this. And she wouldn't see the stress mounting until the point that she broke. And so the work with me was about helping her try and again, she couldn't advance in her career because she didn't have any tenure anyway. And so she was like, kept having to start at the beginning, start at the beginning, start at the beginning. She was stuck in that loop. So she came to me and we worked on that. And during our working together, she found a boyfriend who was, by all accounts, lovely. Like if you think, and when people, I know this happens to you when you work with somebody will describe the person they're dating, and not just at the beginning, but as it goes, and you're like, oh, they're great. They're great for that person. So this boyfriend was great. But then the stress amounted at work, and she wasn't leaving because now she was better at staying it out and addressing it. But she was so swamped that the emotional drifting was happening for her. He seemed annoying and demanding. And he seemed demanding because she was so retreated. He kept trying to re-engage, which she felt as intrusive and demanding. And she kind of fell out of love with him and wanted to break up. And, what I pointed out to her was like, I'm not sure you're out of love. She goes, I don't feel anything. I'm like, because you're kind of burnt out. So we don't when we're burnt out. We numb.
It turns into emotional numbness too, is what I'm hearing you say.
Exactly right. But and when we get emotionally numb, as you know, we can't do it selectively. We kind of numb out in general. So she was numbing out in general, and she was numbing out towards him. You're in that state. It feels very real. It feels like I don't love this person anymore. They're annoying to me sometimes. I don't love them. There's nothing there. But it's not true. It's the numbness. So she was about to break up. I was able to convince her to not break up, to give it more time, to address the burnout, to kind of have the stress recede first, to see if once those waters go down, is there something there or not? And once they did, she reconnected. It took some time, but she was able to reconnect to her feelings because, again, he was a great guy. By her account, I only know him through her eyes. By her account, he was a great guy. Even in his annoying moments, I could see he wasn't being annoying. He was just panicked because he really loved her and she was withdrawing. So it's a tale of loss, but then redemption. And it's the kind of thing that can happen in the workplace. And if you don't have the awareness about how one thing is impacting the other, then I know many couples who break up because work got too difficult. And it's not because they stopped loving each other, unfortunately.
But this is so important. And I think that something that many people don't consider at all. And I'm so happy you're talking about this today and also in your book, which is that the impact of our work and, that we can become so burnt out and not even notice that it's happening, becoming emotionally numb and not really noticing, going on autopilot unintentionally. And it can change the way you feel about your partner, about your relationship because of your own emotional capacity. And I think that it's very common for people in their minds to look for relationship issues to explain this, or maybe something about the partner to explain it. And you've just given us a whole new paradigm here around, no, your burnout and your job are impacting the way you feel day to day, and you don't even know it. Holy mackerel. Wow. What an inspiring conversation. I am so grateful just to get to visit with you and hear about your work and your mission and your message. So tell us more about where people can go to connect with you, connect with the book, if they're like, I want more Dr. Guy Winch in my life because this was amazing.
So my website is guywinch.com. That's GUYWINCH.com. There you can get links to my socials, and you can follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc., wherever you like. I also have a newsletter on Substack called the Psychology Lab. Comes out every 2 weeks, so it's not too much. And every week it's a deep dive into something which I try and explain and give very practical solutions for. And those are the best place. And the book is available everywhere books are sold.
Yeah. And you guys, that's Mind Over Grind, how to break free when work hijacks your life. And I can only imagine, you've been so generous with your time today, and you've taken us into so many strategies and very concrete and specific things that we can do now to start to re-energize ourselves and release this hold, this grip that work has on us. And your book is packed with loads of many more. And I'm guessing that that's what you're doing in your newsletter, which I'm going to go sign up for right now as soon as we hang up.
Great.
Writing it down. Well, thank you again so much for spending this time with me. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure for me too. Thank you so much.
You guys, I don't know about you, but I got so much out of that conversation with Dr. Guy Winch. I felt like at certain points he was actually talking about me and my life, and maybe you felt the same. And if so, I hope it helped you feel seen and understood, but also gave you some new perspective, because so many times we can look outside of ourselves to try to understand how we are feeling or what the problem is. And it's difficult to get your hands around it. But I hope that today you got new visibility into how burnout could be really pervasively impacting so many different dimensions of your life in ways that might even be subtle, but are so real. And so Dr. Winch described so many different strategies and things to try in his book and in his work, which I thought was so incredibly valuable. I'm going to be trying a few of them myself later today. But I also, one of my takeaways from this conversation is the importance of having a space to reconnect with your own awareness and be able to just connect those dots, thinking, I am really all consumed by work to the point where I don't have bandwidth left over at the end of the day to think about anything else. Or perhaps for you, it is, falling into some of those self-care habits that certainly meet the need for rest and relaxation, but might be counterintuitively contributing to your burnout if they are not generating energy, right? That's another thing that we talked about. Or perhaps this has been going on for a while, either on your side or your partners, or both of you, commonly, so common and normal for both people to have their own ambient stress and burnout. And then it's doubly hard to disconnect. And that's actually really common in many couples, especially where two people are working, or even if one person is working, the other person is staying home with kids. Like, that struggle is so real. And over time, what can happen is that really negative patterns begin to take hold because you have gotten so disconnected from each other that bad feelings start to take over, trust is eroded, and it can begin to feel hard to understand, like, how do we even start building bridges back to the center, especially if your relationship has gotten to the point where neither of you feel like being generous with each other or being the one to be kind and reach out and hold the other person's hand when you feel like things have been really challenging and you haven't been getting your needs met in the relationship. Like, again, that is so real. It's something that I see all the time as a marriage counselor. And so all of these situations that I'm describing support in getting visibility into what's really going on for you, maybe even support in being able to connect your own dots and think, maybe I have been hitting it a little bit too hard, or support for being able to do some of the cognitive processing work. Like, what are the problems that I need to solve in order to release some of this rumination? Or even maybe you're dealing with a problem at work or elsewhere in your life that honestly doesn't have an easy, neat solution. If there isn't an answer to solve that problem, that's another thing that can contribute to ongoing rumination. And certainly if it feels like your relationship is getting further and further and further apart, these are all moments when it can be really helpful to have somebody in your corner to support you in doing this work. And that is where a trusted therapist comes in, especially a therapist who has coaching competencies, which many therapists don't have. And the reason why this is so important is because if you come in the door talking about a lot of the things you heard Dr. Guy and I talking about today, a therapist who has their training primarily in clinical mental health is going to be looking for disorder. Major depressive disorder, an anxiety disorder. Maybe there are attachment issues that are getting in the way of the relationship. And now, certainly all of those things could be true. And I think if you are spending a long period of time in a space of burnout, that can actually start to take such a toll that it will manifest in actual psychiatric symptoms, and that's valid, and that deserves treatment, and psychotherapy is the answer to that. However, for many people, most of us, I think, the answer to this isn't necessarily clinical mental health treatment. It is taking a look at who you are, what you care about, like what's genuinely most important to you, and then what you are doing that is either supporting the things that you care about and the outcomes that you want to create in your life, or getting in the way of it. And then this simply turns into an opportunity to take a look at, what could we do differently? Let's talk about different skills or strategies or ways of handling these moments so that you can break free from these old patterns and start operating in a way that is more congruent with your desire for love, for happiness, and success. And that's what happens in coaching. Now, the very best coaching always, I believe, happens with a therapist who is a very experienced therapist, knows what they're doing, but then also has coaching competencies layered on top of this. So they could certainly assess, is this a clinical mental health issue? Are you ruminating because you do actually have an anxiety disorder or, an unresolved trauma history? Because that can also result in rumination, right? And that's worthy of treatment. But if that's not what's going on, I sure would hate for you to spend time, energy, money going down rabbit holes that are going to pathologize your experience, as opposed to helping you find an actionable solution to do things differently and start feeling better, hopefully quickly. And so that is what you can certainly do with clinicians in my network at My Practice Growing Self. Like me, they're all licensed therapists, and also like me, they all specialize in coaching competencies for all the people who are wanting to work on things like what we were talking about today, not necessarily seeking treatment. If that sounds like it might be up your alley, come on over, growingself.com. The first step in getting started is to schedule a free consultation with a clinician of your choice, just to see how it feels, see if it feels like a good fit, talk a little bit more about your hopes, your goals, the things you're unhappy with, the things you'd like to have be different, and then get their take on what creating that change might involve. And if it feels good to you, you can move forward from there. So it starts with a free consultation at growingself.com. Now, of course, if you are looking for a miracle, right? Evidence-based coaching with a therapist that is very, very, very inexpensive. I have a solution for that too. Part of what I do in my organization, I am a training site for therapists who are in the process of becoming board certified coaches. They're all highly experienced, can do therapy in their sleep. Some of them have been doing for 20, 30 years. And now they're ready to pivot in their career and start using coaching competencies to help people, just like you and I were talking about a second ago. This is a growth moment for therapists, and to support their growth and development, clinicians who are finishing our advanced training go through a practicum where they get to work with a handful of clients. And what this creates for you is the opportunity to do this work with a very experienced therapist at a deeply discounted rate. Like $49 a session. I know, it's insane. If you'd like to learn more about that and get in on this, if we still have space available in the upcoming cohort, spaces are limited though, so don't wait on this one. But come to growingself.com/grow to take advantage of this ultra low cost coaching program with a brilliant therapist who really knows how to help you in the way that you need to be helped. Yeah. Okay, so I hope that is everything. We talked about burnout, we talked about strategies, and we talked about longer term solutions to support your growth, love, happiness, and success. And there's more where that came from. I'll be back in touch with you next week with another episode.